At about 5 p.m., December 15th, 1967, the Silver Bridge in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, suddenly collapsed without warning, leading to massive destruction and as many as 46 deaths. 2 of the bodies of these victims were never found. As terrible as this incident was, there was something more mysterious about this collapse. Just moments before the entire 1,460-foot bridge snapped, a creature was seen hovering over it before perching on it. However, this was not the first time this shadowy creature was making an appearance. Just a year before, on November 12, 1966, some gravediggers said a human-like creature with what appeared to be wings flew right over them while they worked. It had been sitting on a tree high up and staring in their direction before swooping down. This is one of the most shocking stories of a mysterious creature many people are convinced came from a world outside ours to spread mayhem. 3 days after the gravediggers witnessed the terrifying Mothman, 2 couples, Roger and Linda Scarberry and Steve and Mary Millette, were driving home in their car after spending the evening together. In the distance ahead, just as they came close to a former munition plant, they saw 2 red glowing lights. Assuming these were the brake lights of a car ahead of them, they followed the lights behind. However, there was something odd about this red light. It was coming towards them. Imagine their terror when they found themselves looking at what looked like a man with wings and red eyes, the Mothman. The couple fled from this terrifying being as fast as possible, but it was not ready to leave them yet. As they sped past the winged beast, it flew close to the car, attempting to stop them. Thankfully, this did not happen, as it soon flew into the night. The terrified group of friends reported this to the local authorities. For strange reasons, the deputy who handled the case said he believed the couple were not making things up. By the next day, the law enforcement officer led a team of officers and some youths to the area to check it out. Of course, they found nothing, but the news from the undertakers and now these couples were enough to set everyone on edge. This was a handwritten deposition from the couples. In the days that followed, the townsmen searched entire areas with hope of capturing this strange creature. Although they found nothing, more locals were reporting sightings of Mothman. In one instance, a woman reported seeing it standing and peering at her window, as though trying to get in. In about a year, there were as many as 200 sightings of the dreaded human bat with glowing red eyes. Strangely, no one ever reported being hurt by Mothman. Yeah, he spooked everyone who encountered him, but no one had turned up dead or injured by him. Sadly, this was about to change by the following year. As the 1967 Christmas holidays approached, the atmosphere was filled with fun and excitement. Unfortunately, Mothman would finally strike after biding his time. As residents of Point Pleasure hurried to get home for the weekend just 10 days before Christmas, no one was prepared for what was about to happen. At about 5 p.m., the traffic on the bridge had reached a standstill. Horns were blaring, but movements were minimal. Hundreds of cars were atop the Silver Bridge, a testament to engineering ingenuity. Suddenly, there was a loud sound, almost like a gunshot. As the motorists tried to make sense of what was happening, the screeching sound of suspension cables snapping could be heard. Everyone on the bridge was trapped, as it was too late to reverse or speedily drive off. The congestion wouldn't allow it. The bridge cable continued to give way, and one after the other, cars began to fall into the icy waters below. Other cars scrambled to get off the bridge, but this was not before dozens of vehicles carrying passengers and some Christmas items had fallen off the bridge. Cries of fear and pain rent the air as the emergency services swung into action. This disaster was the scale of something the small and peaceful town had never experienced. After a while, people were wondering if this was a mere accident or if there was something dreadful about all of this. While Point Pleasant appears to be a pleasant town to settle in, just like its name, there is a dark secret about its past. You see, in the 18th century, the first Indian settlers noticed the intrusion of Americans who wanted to settle on their land. The main tribes on this piece of land were largely Mingo and Shawnee tribesmen. As tensions between both parties grew, a war broke out between the Shawnee tribes, led by Chief Cornstalk, and the American invading troops, led by Colonel Andrew Levi's. The war raged for a long time, until both sides ran out of weapons, so they resorted to some physical forms of combat. In any case, the Americans overpowered the indigenous settlers after more fighting. As a result, the Shawnees opted for a treaty that would allow both parties to coexist in harmony. The Shawnees eventually discovered their new neighbors were dishonoring the treaty. To correct this, Cornstalk and his son visited the head of the American administrative headquarters, Captain Matthew Arbuckle. However, Matthew arrested Cornstalk and his son. I'm not sure why he did this, but it was probably his way of preventing the local tribes from attacking Americans. Days later, some natives killed a young American, and all hell broke loose. Armed men stormed Captain Matthew's town and overpowered him. Afterwards, they killed Cornstalk and his son. Before he died, the chief cursed the land and its people. In his words, he stated that he had come as a friend, but had been murdered along with his son. He spoke against the land, declaring natural disasters and the anger of the Great Spirit upon it. In the years that followed, more Americans settled over this cursed land and built homes and businesses. By 1940, the Second World War was in full swing, and Point Pleasure had an ammunition plant. The place was called the T&T area, or West Virginia Ordnance Works. After the war, the factory was abandoned and eventually became a dumping site for chemical waste. Over time, the entire area soon becomes polluted by the excess waste, and then bizarre things start to happen to the residents of this city. For starters, UFO activities began. One of the town's residents, Woodrow Derenberg, reported a strange encounter he had one day while driving. In his words, something like an old-fashioned kerosene lamp chimney landed in the middle of the road when he was driving. The sight terrified him, but his ordeal was just about to start. A strange-looking humanoid with a weird smile came out of the UFO and spoke with him. This guy would later become known as Cold Ingrid. Woodrow said Ingrid paid him more visits later on, and they even visited a planet called Lanulos. This appears like something out of a book, but in any case, more people came forward to report sighting some strange objects flying. Some claim to have received messages from the people in these flying saucers. However, this was only the beginning of even weirder things. In the days that followed, things got even scarier. There were reports of ghost sightings and electrical interferences that affected and blew up televisions, and phones ringing at odd hours. When these calls were answered, there was usually no one at the other end of the line, just a static noise. However, all these appeared to be some preparations for what was coming. On the 1st of November, 1966, a National Guard reported a strange man looking like a bat staring at him from high up a tree. After a while, it simply vanished. Then, on November 16, 1966, just a day after Roger and Linda Scarberry and their friends had seen the Mothman, a woman called Marcella Bennett experienced the mystery man. That evening, Marcella was alone at the time with her baby. Her neighbors had seen something cycling the air near the T&T area. It appeared to be a helicopter, but a silent one. Marcella also saw this strange glowing light and was disturbed by it. She got into her car with her baby and drove towards her neighbor's property to probably stay with them since her husband was not around. After getting out of the car, she walked to the other side of the car to get her baby out when she heard a strange sound. With her baby in her hand, she spun around and was met with one of the most terrifying sights ever. She found herself staring at the horrendous red eyes of a half-man, half-bird. Marcella became paralyzed and did something that still haunts her to date. She dropped her 4-year-old daughter as the evil creature rose to full height, taller than a man before her. Quickly, she grabbed her crying baby and made for her neighbor's residence. The family was stunned by her appearance. They knew she had seen something terrible. Although they had seen its shape in the sky, they didn't look it in the face like Marcella. They quickly bolted the doors and huddled together, unsure of what would happen in the next moment. For a while, there was silence and calm, and their fear began to dissolve. However, this was short-lived. Marcella and her host soon heard the stumping of feet on the porch and the scraping sound of what she knew all too well to be the wings of Mothman. It was clear this creature was not done with her. As they waited in fear, the beast walked to the door and stared at them from outside. Time froze as Marcella and everyone in that room stared into the cold, red, and horrifying eyes of Mothman. Her neighbors summoned the courage to call the cops, but the creature was long gone before they arrived. This experience forever changed Marcella. Her dreams were overtaken by that dark experience. It would take months before she finally moved on, or at least managed to move away from the horror of that day. The sightings continued by more people, with some of them documenting what they saw, just like you can hear in this audio clip.
I saw, this big bird-looking thing go over top of my car.
I could see it wasn't a man, that it looked more like a bird. Instead of arms, they were like wings.
I had a huge wingspan on it. It was at least 10 feet.
I was paralyzed.
Really?
And I just thought, well, I'm going to die.
As the news of these sightings grew, one man felt he was prepared to take on this strange mystery in Point Pleasure and traveled there. His name was John Keel. Keel was fascinated by extraterrestrial activities and loved everything UFO. His interest grew in the 40s after reading a book on UFOs. He even won the award for the UFOologist of the Year in 1967. This award is captured in the foreword of his book, The Mothman Prophecies, which later became a Hollywood feature movie starring Richard Gere in 2002. Keel dove into investigating the sightings in the areas. He needed to know if it was all true or made up, but this came at a cost. In the course of his work, he would have terrible headaches, but this was not all. Strange things began to happen at his home. For instance, his phone would ring at strange hours with no one at the other end, just like the locals had experienced. He also believed his phones were tapped and that suspected government officials, or whoever they were interested in what he was doing. Unlike most UFOologists, Keel seemed different. In his book, he stated that he was no longer interested in just stories that backed up his idea of UFOs, but their actual source. How did they come? What led to their operations on Earth? And he was quite logical in his approach to this subject. He wanted scientific proof, and not just blind faith that extraterrestrial beings existed. Ultimately, after much research, Keel proposed a theory that the Mothman was not extraterrestrial, but ultra-terrestrial. This meant that the Mothman existed in a realm higher than the Earth realm. Almost all faith adherents believe in the supernatural. There are accounts of angels, demons, spirits, jinns, and other creatures that exist in a realm higher than our three-dimensional realm. And according to Keel, the Mothman is from there. Keel also believes that humans in some way contribute to the appearance of these strange beings or phenomena. In attempting to explain this, he discusses the possibility of the human soul generating sufficient energy capable of summoning just about anything in the universe. He was also absolutely convinced that the men in black following him around were not from this dimension. Instead, they were shape-shifting individuals from another dimension. As for Mothman's appearance, Keel had a theory. The years 1966 and 1967 had special significance in the Hindu faith. It was the year of the Garuda, a deity whose appearance was that of a man and bird. Keel equally believes Mothman's bird-like form had something to do with Banshee. This was a bird known to announce the demise of family members just before it happened. As a person, I am aware of certain climes in Africa and other parts of the world where some birds, like the owl and vulture, are considered evil omens. This is possibly what Mothman represents to those who saw it. I know this sounds all mumbo-jumbo, but it might surprise you that certain secret agencies and scientific experts are inclined to believe something closely related to this. It is no longer news that there is a possibility that the Earth was ushered into a new dimensional reality in 2022 by the European Council for Nuclear Research, or CERN. This was facilitated by the God particle. This particle, which is really known as the Higgs boson particle, is believed to give mass to just about everything in the universe. Without it, we would not have the atom or any subatomic particle. It was discovered during an experiment at CERN in 2012. For a particle this important, the science community believes it can provide the missing link to our understanding of dark matter, other aspects of our universe, and who knows, the existence of parallel universes, or in this case, the ultra-terrestrial. Keel also suspects that Mothman exists for one of three reasons. 1. The creature came to supervise events before they occurred without interrupting. 2. The creature came to warn people of impending doom or was responsible for the destruction. Or 3. No one can say with any certainty. Strangely enough, the Mothman sightings in Point Pleasure stopped. Just as suddenly as it began, it was over, at least until 8 years later in a different town. But there was a reason why Keel suspected the Mothman was nothing more than a messenger. In 1975, Binghamton, New York, the Mothman made an appearance. Residents who saw it described it just as the people in Point Pleasure. 2 years later, some German miners were on their way to work. As they got into the mines, they were met by a strange-looking man who appeared dressed in a trench coat. At least, this is what they thought, until he screamed at the miners, who took to their heels. Moments afterward, the mine collapsed, creating the notion that the Mothman had just played the role of a superhero, saving the lives of these men. By the mid-80s, workers of the chemical plant at the famous Chernobyl and residents in the city documented seeing a black bird that looked like Mothman. This was followed by strange occurrences until the tragic plant explosion of April 1986. There are also pieces of evidence implying that Mothman or a similar creature was in New York sometime before the Twin Tower blast. All these events appear to make out the Mothman to be a messenger of some sort, warning people of impending doom. And here's the thing, there were more than 20 sighting reports of a winged humanoid spotted in Chicago as recently as 2020. So it still exists. Most of the alleged sightings have occurred at night and near water, but there are also several of these reports that come from Chicago O'Hare Airport, where several workers have seen a large, winged, humanoid figure while they were on the job. A lot of these people didn't come forward because they were afraid they would lose their jobs and be called crazy. Which is one problem with the Mothman sightings. Most people who do see them are afraid of reporting them for fear of being called crazy. But the fact that the Mothman is associated with impending doom, I can't help but ask, what impending doom is about to befall Chicago? Now, as usual, we have the thinking audience who say otherwise. Everything, according to them, has a reasonable explanation. For starters, the TNT area. The Mothman seemed to have a thing for the TNT area. I did say earlier in this video that it was an abandoned munitions plant that eventually became a dumping ground for chemical waste. While I am not sure what specific wastes were dumped here, it is to be expected that these areas were contaminated. This contamination could have given rise to some form of radiation poisoning, and some of the psychological effects of radiation poisoning include fear, anxiety, and grief, among others. Is it possible that the residents of Point Pleasure experienced mass hysteria caused by radiation poisoning? Another incident that highlighted Mothman's existence is the collapse of the Silver Bridge. However, I did a little research and found some shocking things about the bridge. Before its eventual collapse, some users had complained about the state of the bridge. A resident who survived the tragedy stated, "I was worried about that bridge every time I crossed over. If you got stuck in the middle of that bridge, it would wave back and forth, back and forth." The bridge had major engineering flaws in its design. The engineers who worked on it were known to have compromised on the initial design of the bridge in a bid to cut costs. It was also constructed with little redundancy. In plain terms, there was no backup plan for the bridge if it snapped at any point. The implication of this is that the Silver Bridge was a trap all along, and Mothman's purported appearance may have had little to do with its collapse. Despite these obvious flaws, the bridge was packed and filled almost every other day, with hundreds of cars exerting pressure on its faulty design. It was only a matter of time before it succumbed to the tons of weight it carried daily. I would also like to recall an account of a witness I mentioned earlier. Remember the account of Marcella Bennett? Well, I found another account of the same experience. In my earlier account, she stated that her neighbors had seen Mothman in the sky before she saw it close to her car. The second account says she had gone to see her brother. When she was done visiting, she and her brother left the house. Almost as soon as they stepped out, they saw Mothman. Her brother screamed at her to get back to the house, but she was paralyzed with fear. She eventually snapped out of her fear and ran back in. My point is, which of these accounts is true? Was she saved by her brother or her neighbors? Again, it is possible that her mind was unable to process the situation, so she had a hard time remembering all the details. I assume such trauma would linger in the memory of the victim. In all these, what I find most amusing is how Point Pleasure embraces this supposed menace. The locals have an erected statue of Mothman. Call me crazy if you want, but this doesn't seem like something you want to remember or celebrate, especially as it is believed to bring ill luck. In 2002, a Mothman Day festival was instituted in Point Pleasure. There is also a welcoming symbol of the Mothman, with red lights for what are supposed to be his eyes. None of these strike me as people who saw something as terrible as a harbinger of evil. Or maybe it was because they finally agreed with Keel that the figure was an omen of good, warning people of impending doom. Now, these are plausible reasons from the critics, and could be accurate. Heck, I dare say factual. But that doesn't explain the sightings in different cities and timelines, nor does it answer a lot of unanswered questions. The unanswered questions about this strange being remain. One of which is, did we somehow open up a portal that invited something who comes to warn us ahead of time like CERN did in this video? Or are these all folklore and the active imaginations of dozens of people experiencing mass hysteria? I don't know about you, but I'm inclined to believe the first one.